Right then, let's go.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the 2-on-1 Powerchair Football Podcast powered by MK Battery for the 24-25 season. MK Battery's commitment to the sport goes far beyond sponsorship of this podcast. Their continued investment in innovation, accessibility and development has helped shape the pathway from grassroots to the elite level, powering athletes with the equipment and reliability they need to perform at their best. From supporting competitions across the world to enabling platforms like this to share stories, spotlight players and build connections, MK Battery have shown time and time again what meaningful partnership looks like. Just like we did in episode 24, this will be a two-part episode reflecting on one of the biggest weekends in the Powerchair football calendar, and there is plenty to cover. In part one, we're focusing on the Good Road to Derby, a 200-mile cycle challenge undertaken by WFA chairperson Dean Williams and long-term supporter of the WFA, Nick Woodward. This was done to raise vital funds for the newly launched WFA Benevolent Fund. We'll be talking about the motivation behind the ride, the journey itself, and the incredible welcome they received at the Derby Arena. Then in part two, I'll be breaking down all the drama from the quarterfinals and semi-finals of the John Good Group WFA Cup for the 24-25 season, and we'll also be previewing this season's upcoming final set for Sunday the 29th of June at St George's Park as part of the EEFA Disability Cup weekend. For part one, as mentioned, I'm delighted to be joined by the man at the centre of it all, not just on the day at Derby, but throughout the build-up to WFA chairperson Dean Williams, who's here to talk about the full journey, the highs, the lows, the fundraising effort, and what it meant to cross the finish line surrounded by the Powerchair football community. Dean, welcome back to the podcast. First things first, how are you?
Well, good to be back. And how am I? I'm better than I thought I would be. I thought I'd be nursing a week on. I thought I'd be nursing all kinds of challenges with my knees and legs and aches and pains. But I've been a lot better than what I thought, actually. So when's the next challenge?
Absolutely. We'll get into the challenge. It was, obviously, for those that don't know, it was created and launched for the WFA Benevolent Fund, a new support fund designed to help members of the Powerchair football community mitigate financial difficulty. For anyone hearing about this for the first time, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is, why it was created, and what you hope it can achieve going forward?
Yeah, sure. Pleasure to do that. So I suppose the inspiration came from other charitable organisations, Ryan, that I'd looked at, and they'd set up these benevolent funds, which, I mean, you've done a very good stab of introducing it straight away. Effectively, that is what it's for, what you've said. So effectively, I would like that to be a fund of money that grows over a period of time that enables players, clubs, new existing clubs to be helped out in periods of hardship, whatever may be causing that. So it's not to take away any of the efforts that our existing clubs and our players already do, because they're very, very resourceful and very good at their fundraising. So it's not a replacement of that, but it's to offer assistance where we feel we are able to do that on a stated number of things that we will decide on and brings out as almost like a terms of reference over the coming years. So I don't see this as an immediate thing at all. I think we've been very clear on that. This is the build-up of a fund over the medium to long term. So I would suggest that we would probably be actively looking to take applications into the fund, again, against those stated areas that I've already talked about in terms of getting to a list of those specific things, probably in about 3 years' time. It needs to build to a certain level first and foremost.
No, that's fantastic to hear, just to provide that clarity as to what it is and set the expectations. But the fact that something has been created to support the Powerchair football community, I think that's the ultimate message that needs to be put across this podcast and all of our platforms. We obviously want to go through this podcast talking about the Good Road to Derby and your particular fundraising challenge, but I have to shine a spotlight before we do so on another challenge that took place at the same time as yours, and it was undertaken by Matthew Stevens. So WFA Secretary took on an incredible solo coast-to-coast walk covering 200 miles, walking from the west coast of England at St. Pease all the way to the east, finishing at Robin's Hood Bay. No big team around him, just Matthew out walking every day, pushing for nearly 2 weeks, and by the end of it, as of today, he's raised just shy of £4,500 on his own.
Amazing.
It really is a huge effort, and I think what even made it even more special was the fact that he was greeted by members of the Powerchair football community at the finish line, so Kath and Carolyn Goldsborough, as well as Greg Baxter, and a real brilliant capping moment, and probably a reminder for Matthew as to what the whole thing is about and the people who he hopes to support, or what the challenge will support, the fund will support going forward. When you see challenges like that running alongside your own, what does it say about the strengths and the spirits of the community, and how can people undertake their own challenges to support this fund?
I mean, first and foremost, Matthew, I mean, what an inspiration that is as a challenge. I mean, I've 200 miles, there seems to be a theme going on here, but he's done over a period of 2 weeks. I don't think I could have lasted that long at all, Ryan. If you speak to Nick, he probably said he wish he'd have been on his own doing the challenge rather than with me for 2 days. I'm sure we'll get onto that. But no, what an outstanding effort and achievement, and what an incredible amount of money that he's raised as well. If that's the figure, that's an updated figure, I believe, for £4,500. That is just superb. The whole point of the Benevolent Fund, Ryan, was to give people inspiration, also a route and a vehicle to go and raise money for a very given cause and a very given procedure. So, for example, we have our day-to-day running costs at the WFA. This is not something, the Benevolent Fund, that pays for those day-to-day running costs. This is something that, as we've talked about already, helps sustainability of Powerchair football for years to come. So actually, I wanted there to be something that people have a knowledge and a comfort, whoever they are, that when they're raising money alongside the Benevolent Fund, it's for a very given purpose. It doesn't get eked out on different things around the day-to-day running costs. So that is completely restricted, if you like, and ring-fenced for the purposes that we'll set on it. And I think that's really important for everyone in the community to understand. So for me, it's never about Nick and I going out and we were kickstarting the Benevolent Fund. It's not about us two at all. We will probably go on to replicate challenges ourselves, more for him. But the reality is it's about other people wanting to actively give and then have it restricted in a way that they know it's going to a certain place, and they know there's going to have some governance that sits alongside of that. And that's the really important thing. So I love the fact that other people want to pick up challenges and then raise money for the Benevolent Fund. Matthew being in theory, he started before us, right? So he's the one that in theory has kicked this off. Nick goes with another challenge in June, which makes mine look like, as he said on a few occasions, just a warm up for him. And then I'm hoping what happens with that, Ryan, is that escalates and provides inspiration for other people to do exactly the same thing. And if we manage to achieve that, we're not talking about one or two people's efforts. We're talking about collectively. We know our community is a superpower. Collectively, the efforts of a massive community that can have it ring fence in a certain area. And that fund, the more people do that, the more it grows to a very sizable amount. And we've got some big decisions to make in terms of investment and then taking applications, perhaps even sooner than 3 years. But I don't want to create that as an expectation right from the get-go. But, surprise me. I think if people stepped up and went, you know what, we're going to go for this. It's a brilliant cause. It's what we're passionate about. We believe that that's ring fence an area that we really believe is important. It's legacy stuff. It's about future sustainable years of the sport. then I'm hoping that's enough to make people then find the inspiration to say, what can I do to really push myself and challenge myself and raise that money and give it to that fund? So I love the way it started. That was the whole ambition of it. And there's a bit of a fanfare around, and we'll get onto this, Nick and I turning up, which was a very, very special moment for me personally. But it is about a collective effort of people all coming together to get that fund as big and as sizable as we can make that, to give ultimate protection for the future of Powerchair football in England. And that's what it's about. Yeah,
we'll definitely get onto your welcome at the Derby Arena later in this episode. But once again, a huge thank you and congratulations to Matthew on a monumental undertaking, a solo challenge from coast to coast. And you alluded to a challenge that Nick will soon announce, also in support of the Benevolent Fund, and that is something to be marvelled at. It's more information coming soon, but it's incredible to see all of these amazing individuals looking to fundraise and create challenges that will in turn and in time support the Powerchair football community directly. And I think we can almost use this as a call to action. Anyone that wants to support the Benevolent Fund and or the WFA, please don't hesitate to get in touch with either myself, Dean, or others at the WFA. We will, of course, look to facilitate your challenges and give you all of the support and promotion you need for that. But coming back to the Good Road to Derby, just give a little bit of context. In episode 24, we spoke about how the idea of the challenge came to life and how it's evolved in the lead up to what became a 200-mile fundraising journey. That brings us to the starting point in Hull, the home of the John Good Group, proud title sponsors of the WFA Cup. It was the perfect place, I think, to begin something like this with a partner who's not long been affiliated or involved with the sport of Powerchair football, relatively speaking, but one who is now just completely obsessed with helping us grow this game, which is just amazing. We also had the opportunity to film a special episode of this podcast in partnership with Init Creative at their studios in Hull, and that, for me, was such a brilliant way to kick things off and set the tone for what the challenge was all about: raising awareness, building momentum, and shining a light on the power of the community behind our sport. How did it feel starting in what was a very sunny Hull, with the backing of the John Good Group, the people that came to see yourself and Nick off at the offices in Hessel, but also the added energy of filming something special within it to launch the challenge properly? Give me your thoughts.
The Init thing first of all, so that's chronology, that's where it all started. I mean, that was brilliant. We were all t-shirted up, we were on brand, weren't we? It started to become very real at that point. I think from the Thursday night it felt a bit real. The bike's in the car, I'm staying in a hotel alongside yourself, Ryan, and we're kind of set then, aren't we? It's an early breakfast and then off we go. But I think talking about it on that podcast, I mean, it was a brilliant podcast, by the way. And again, you don't like me saying these things, but you did a fantastic job of facilitating that. It was absolutely awesome way to start it. And the more I was talking on that podcast, the more I was getting ready to go for the challenge. And the more there's that stark realization that I've got a lot of people here that have got eyes on this and I don't want to let anybody down. So, and I think that's relevant to say that because there were dark moments on the 200-mile journey that we took. And I'll get into some of those moments, which are a test for your own resilience. But they're helped by the fact that people have an expectation of you to complete a challenge that you've set out in front of you. So I thought that was a brilliant way to start it. And then, of course, when we left there are always a few surprises with John Good Group. And I'm not sure we mustn't ever be guilty of not giving them the credit they deserve. And I'm not saying that from your perspective. I have to remind myself of that because I always think that on private WhatsApp messages to Adam Walsh, the CEO, I say thank you so many times. It's a bit of a running joke, but of course he's not the only recipient that needs the thanks. So to anyone that's listening from John Good Group, what an amazing organisation you are that promotes values around that whole family connection and throwing themselves into things and doing good as a general ethos as a business. And my goodness me, do they deliver by that and live by that? It's absolutely fantastic. So that was probably one of the most touching experiences that I've ever had. And I think Nick's quite a private guy, as you know, Ryan. Many of the community will know. So it felt like an overwhelming thing at times, but to have turned up, we'd left our bikes there, and they produced this incredible banner, which I didn't even notice when I first rode out and we were going on our way, and then a bit of a foghorn to announce that we were leaving, and lots of applause, and just the care and consideration from individual conversations with people as well. They're an outstanding organisation. I'm very proud to have them associated with the Wheelchair Football Association and Powerchair Football in general. And again, it's one of those things that gives you, it seems a very cliche thing to say, but it gives you an extra little bit in your legs where you think, okay, there's a bit more strength there, which is great, exactly what I needed. And then we left them and off we go. It started from that point.
I was almost ashamed that Alex and I missed the official launch of the challenge at the offices of the John Good Group, because we was tied up at the studios of Init, previewing the actual cup fixtures that were set to take place on the Sunday. But from what I've seen from pictures and videos, it just looked like such an amazing send-off.
It was great.
An incredible community, both Powerchair and the one that John Good Group have. So from the offices of John Good Group, you set off west across the country, heading deep into the countryside and gradually making your way towards the outskirts of Manchester. Your wife and I met you around the halfway point of that day, and at that stage, I don't want to speak on your behalf, things appeared fairly steady and really positive, a good way to kick things off. But I know the real challenge came after that.
It did.
Once the light started to fade and the tough inclines increased in their prevalence. Talk us through that first day. Did it go as expected? And what was going through your head as things started to become a challenge?
So it's probably worth just saying that I deliberately wanted to be quite naive about the journey. And the reason for that is because I knew that if I knew I was going to encounter, my geography is not bad of the UK. I know I was going to encounter some moments, but I didn't want someone to show me that too much. So Nick has been brilliant and logistically setting the whole thing up and then managing that, finding the most appropriate route, but also by the same token, not sharing too much with me. So I knew there were going to be moments like that, but talk about a false sense of security. Because when I left John Good Group in Hull, that I would say the first 2-3 hours were an absolute dream. So it's relatively flat. There was not much to encounter at all. It's probably the gentle start that you want. You don't want anyone to test you that thoroughly right at the start. So it felt like a dream. We were while we were riding, Nick was doing lots of videoing. You've been the recipient of a lot of those videos, Ryan, as well. And also the cameras on, beautiful meadows and fields. It just looked idyllic. And I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. Why did I not go for 400? And then we met you in the pub, like you say, and we refueled, and that was an important thing to do. And then again, that continued for a little while where the terrain was absolutely fine. And then we got towards, I mean, Nick would probably want to correct me on this. He's very much into his detail, but it felt like about 5:30 and we stopped at a Starbucks. And I can't remember exactly where we were, but it was the moment when Nick had to get his phone out and the various maps that he downloaded and then show me visually what we were about to encounter. And that was probably the first little checkpoint for me from a mental capacity to think about, okay, so are you really up for this challenge or not? Because you knew it'd be difficult at times, but this is now going to be black and white in front of you. So he was amazing with me for the whole thing, Nick, and he's very gentle. We'd stopped at a Starbucks deliberately. He knows I like my oat cappuccinos, and I think, he coincided the news he was about to deliver with me having an oat cappuccino and a deep breath in. My knee was pretty sore, and I'm well aware that my community live in constant difficulties and challenges with various different ailments and disabilities that they have to face. From my own personal point of view, my knees are not in the best shape. So just let me give some context to that. I knew that before I was doing it. And my right knee, which is my poorly knee, held up okay. My left knee started to become a bit of a problem. I wasn't expecting that at all. So I actually ended up taking a brace that I'd had on my right knee and putting it on my left knee. And that was the time when Nick said, right, okay, here's where we need to look at what we're going to do next and what kind of energy we're going to put into this as well. So we're kind of in this area, having a Starbucks, deep breath in. I must admit, I phoned my good lady wife and said, my knee is pretty painful. It's really, really quite uncomfortable. And Nick's just showing me what we need to do. There's no way our anticipated ETA is going to ring true when we have to get down to Delft, just outside Oldham. And then Nick and I looked at each other, we finished the coffee, and then off we go. And then there was probably, he gave me a bit of a lead in, there was probably about 3-4 kilometres, which were okay, and then the hills started. So we're talking, for people's reference here, we're talking about the Pennines, and then eventually leading into the moors. Some of the most difficult terrain that I've experienced on a bike. I'm not a bike enthusiast at all. If I was walking up that, I would find that a bit of a challenge. I mean, some of those hills, the gradients were quite extraordinary. So we managed to negotiate by hook or by crook. Good Road to Derby. I'm not sure that's the right title in the end, because I wasn't feeling it was very good at this point, Ryan. But ultimately, I think from my perspective, whatever we needed to do to get up those hills was all that needed to be done. So it required a lot of digging in terms of getting our legs going. But there were times when I had to hop off on a gradient and walk the bike up to get to the top of the hill, and then make sure I would be facing for a brief bit of respite, it felt like, just to go down and not even use the pedals, which was kind of dream mode when you're in that kind of situation. And that continued. The Pennines seemed to go on and on for a long time. And, I must admit, there were moments of massive frustration when you kind of get over the top of a hill, you feel there's a little bit of a reprieve, and then in comes the next one. It felt like that for a long time. I think when we sat down, Nick and I, in Starbucks, there was 26 kilometres to go that day, and it just took an absolute age to do it. So the Pennines were then negotiated, and then you go straight into the moors. And I'll never forget it, actually. There was one moment where Nick had slightly gone ahead of me, which is absolutely fine. He was digging in, and is a very experienced cyclist. And I think it was called Marsden Golf Club. And I found myself adjacent to the entrance to that. And there's no one else around apart from a bus. And the bus is trying to get up this hill, and it tries to get up this incline, and it's really struggling. I looked down at my little legs and thought, okay, this is a moment, Dean, because if the bus is struggling, I'm not sure how you're going to get up this at all. But of course, by hook or by crook, again, you just make sure you get up there. I'm pretty sure at times, the moment when I got off my bike and had to walk it up these inclines is when I was actually going backwards, when my legs wouldn't power for anything else, and I was starting to drift backwards. And you think, okay, I'm getting nowhere here at all, so off we go again. And then again, that bit, rapidly, as you've just alluded to, Ryan, we were losing the light. So Nick and I were very conscious of that. We had lights on the bikes. What we didn't anticipate is towards the back end of that, Nick's lights going at all, and probably schoolboy errors for both of us. We didn't have any spare batteries or anything like that at that moment in time. So we're at the top of the moors at this point, and we were communicating with you. As you will know, you also were tracking us, and you were probably quite concerned at the time, because I think we were about 20 to 10, quarter to 10, something like that. So the light had completely gone. And this is the moment. Nick's lovely wife, Diane, drives past in their car, and she was scheduled to get there obviously later that evening. And because there's nothing really happening on the moors, Nick knew that was Diane. It's electric car, has a certain sound, right? She stops outside. At the moment, we'd lost Nick's lights. We'd also, we'd about to power up another hill that just looked crazy, absolutely crazy. But the one thing we knew was at the top of that hill, we'd probably got about 3.5 mile descend into Delft, into just outside Oldham. And that's where we were staying that night. So Nick and I looked at each other. Diane's got roof racks on her car. The easy thing to have done would have been to say, let's call this a day. We're losing light and we'll start from this point the next day. But we knew that would be quite detrimental in terms of the journey for day two. So we didn't want to do that. Nick and I looked at each other and we just made the decision that we would walk through the moors in amongst a little bit of mud and certain terrain and get our bikes up this hill, knowing that we've got that 3.5 mile descend. Asking Di just for safety perspective to just be monitoring what's going on behind us a little bit to make sure we're okay. And then I have to say, one of the biggest adrenaline kicks that I've ever had is that 3.5 mile descend into Delph, which felt like an awful long time, but we were able to go at some pace and obviously monitoring with my lights on, staying very close to Nick and making sure that we're not doing anything that's unsafe, with Diane behind us as well, monitoring the situation and then getting into Delph. And as you'll know, you were there waiting patiently. You got fed up with waiting in terms, and quite rightly so, in terms of having your evening meal with my good lady wife and Jack Humphreys, who had met us there as well. Apologies, Jack, because that's well later than what we anticipated. And we get in there, and that was pretty much bang on 10 o'clock, wasn't it, that night? So I think we've been in the saddle for, I think it was 12 hours that first day. It was grueling. It was difficult. It was really tough. I'm proud of myself if I'm allowed to be quite self-effacing for a moment, because there were moments there where you thought, my goodness me, what are we doing? This is really, really tough. But I'm really proud that we had those significant moments and tests, the kind of tests that our communities we know have day in, day out. And you find a way and you kind of get through that. And I think it was brilliant that we had those moments to make those decisions. And Nick and I have been talking about them pretty much constantly since we did it and sending each other messages. They're moments that we'll never forget, because you have two decisions, don't you? Either you call it a day and you might have a plan to restart the next day, or you work your way through it. And I learned a lot about myself in 2 days and 200 miles, but that was the first day. So that was an interesting introduction on the first. I think it was probably about 36 kilometers, I think, day one. But we did it, no matter how late. And then I promptly fell asleep, had something to eat, fell asleep in the bath, which is probably the most dangerous thing I did that day.
So that goes on to my next point. I was going to go on to say, you eventually made it to the hotel. I know Jack, Roz and I were worrying because the tracker that Nick had sorted out was very sporadic, no doubt, due to the lack of signal in and around the moors. And I know from driving a similar route to the one that you cycled, how many inclines and declines there were. I've never driven around that area on the outskirts of Manchester before, but I was just thinking I would not want to be cycling this.
It's a beautiful area with amazing views. And seeing the sunset actually was, if we'd have been to time, by the way, Ryan, we wouldn't have seen anything like that. So, I'm bound to take the positive from it. Random things like seeing family of sheep, lambs, just coming towards you in the middle of the road. All a bit surreal, really, but so quiet, so quiet. And when you lose the light up in places like the moors, as many people listen to this who are either cyclists or they're walkers, they'll know it's a bit eerie. It's a little bit eerie at that point. So, there's a bit of motivation because you don't want to be stuck there. That's 100%. We would not want to have spent the night there.
No, I imagine that hot meal on Bath felt very well earned after day one, after everything that you've kind of gone through. What was kind of your thought process at that point? Were you feeling confident heading into day two, or were there some real reservations creeping in about what was still to come?
The community hopefully have got to know me quite well. You'll know me very well, Ryan. We spent a lot of time together in the nearly 2 years I've been with the organisation, and I've got a little bit of guts. So it's really foreign for me to not give anything my absolute best. So I would never have not tried day two. So there's a lot of recovery work that's done in a very short space of time. So the bath is essential, 100%. Trying to get as much sleep as you can was also essential. And then, my good lady wife, she is just, if any of the community have taken a chance to get to know Roz, she's a wonderful person and would kind of do anything for everyone. But, massaging early in the morning to strapping up with rock tape and taking all the right kind of medications, the painkillers and all that kind of stuff, that was all done very early in the mornings, and that was my day too. But there's moments, Ryan, that would have helped me. So things like on the start of day two, a very good friend of mine and client called Kath Thomas, who also is a very, very experienced cyclist. Kath was meeting us to leave at 7:30. So again, these are big moments in the process of when you're a bit jaded and you're finding it all a bit hard, because again, it's the spirit of not letting people down. I was never going to let Kath have biked from our home to meet us at the hotel. What was it called? The Old Ship? Something like that? Ship Inn, something like that. But I was never going to let her down from having made the effort to do that and then not go out of my way to give that my very best. So out we get, 7:30, we're all ready. We meet Kath, we have a bit of an embrace. And the first thing they say to me is, Dean, that descent that you had for 3.5 miles, obviously that now means that you're in the valley. So you now have to go back up. And my heart did sink a little bit. I thought, okay, so I'm not sure if it's a good thing I'm doing this at the start of day two or a bad thing. But actually, again, Nick and Kath in this instance were absolutely superb. Got me up that hill. I was able to do that without any getting off and pushing the bike up. And then again, as you go into Manchester, which most people will be very familiar with this, it gets very flat. So for a long period of time, once we got to the top of that hill and out of that valley, that was very comfortable. The only slight uncomfortable moment was I had a puncture. It was the only puncture we had in the whole of the time, but it was me. And as you've seen from the pictures, yes, I was playing more of a supervisory role for Nick and Kath to change the puncture, which was very stubborn. It wasn't easy, so we got held up a little bit before we met up with some of our sponsors, but that all got prepared and we never had any other issues at all. So yeah, that's when you're absolutely pleased you decided to bring the spare inner tubes and stuff like that, which would have always been the case with someone like Nick on the logistics, etc., etc. So in Manchester was really flat and absolutely fine, and then picking up the sponsors and celebrating our sponsors. So Slater and Gordon, fantastic, and then UA92 and then Optegra. That was all brilliant to do.
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, day two through the centre of Manchester, you've already touched on it. I think it's important to reiterate that was kind of the real core, the crux of the challenge itself. It wasn't about just covering the distance. It was about connecting with people and partners that are so intrinsically linked with Powerchair Football. So 3 organisations you've already mentioned who you stopped in to see or made part of the Good Road to Derby route: Slater and Gordon, University Academy 92 or UA92 for short, and Optegra, 3 organisations that have played such a vital role in championing inclusion, creating real-world opportunities, and overall helping to raise the visibility of Powerchair Football across England. Can you touch on who you rode with and who came out to meet you on the stretch, and what moments stood out for you as you passed through Manchester?
So the Manchester bit is really quite surreal, isn't it? So you find yourself cycling into a big city that normally I'm used to being on foot, going around Manchester, but also driving around Manchester. So you see very different perspective. I have to say one of the things that stood out to me was how well catered Manchester or cyclists were within Manchester. So you had dedicated cycle lanes for an awful lot of it, which was great. So when you've got a lot to look at, your kilometres get eaten up really, really quickly. And Manchester was one of those experiences. So it didn't feel like any time at all before we actually got to UA92 and just celebrated for a brief moment, took some of the social media photos that we've since posted, and then met with the Slater and Gordon guys. So the Slater and Gordon guys, I named them, what wonderful, wonderful people. So we had 3 of them. We had Mike, we had Richard, and we had Alice. Mike has already become quite familiar within our community. He's turned up to watch the Premiership weekend, and he's been quite a presence so far on other bits and pieces that we've done. So Mike's an absolute true gent, and it's my first experience of meeting both Richard and Alice. I might have a rule before we started this, Ryan, of no pro riders at all. I'm not sure where that rule went because everyone was more experienced than me. But then again, I was a total utter novice. So they brought their knowledge and experience and their insight to the ride. There's no question about that. And again, I thought were very, very gentle with me in terms of having a novice with them. I'd been very keen through Nick to manage people's expectations around that this is a race that I'm not sure how I do it, how quick I do it, but I want to do it. But I'm not a pro cyclist and this is not familiar to me. So if somebody wanted to go racing ahead, I had that little bit of a fear that it would be quite frustrating for them as group and individuals, but that wasn't the case. They had a duty of care towards me, and we stopped quite a lot in terms of just refueling and just taking a breather before we had some inclines, and they were happy to do that, or certainly looked like they were happy to do that. So, fair play to Slater and Gordon and those three individuals because they stayed with us right the way through to St George's Park. And then I just want to give a shout out to Ortega as well, because we were met by the managing director, Matt Pickering, who I know very well, and also I know equally well Jennifer Abbott as well. She's part of the senior leadership team there. Amazing. There were one or two other people there, but they enabled us to just have a bit of a loose stop, which of course is quite important on these things, but also to refuel. So the chocolate was ready. The intake of Lucozade was ready as well. And it's a pleasure just to bump into, their friends, right? So friends of the Wheelchair Football Association, friends of mine. So it's nice when you get to see faces, and again, it keeps you going. It gives you that little pump that you need and little lift that you need to get on to the next bit. And when we'd done all of that, that was us then leaving Manchester and then going towards St George's Park. So that makes that sound like an easy part of the journey. It wasn't necessarily, but that was the plan.
It does, but I'm sure that stopping in at all of these valuable sponsors and seeing all these incredible people gave you so much energy.
Yeah.
But as you've said, you then cycled south into the Staffordshire countryside, making your way to St George's Park, a really important stop on the journey, not only because it's home of some of our biggest events, but it also represents the strengths of the partnership between the WFA and the FA. How was the leg of the ride from Manchester to St George's Park? And more importantly, how did that final stretch feel going into St George's Park? Because anyone that knows what the entrance is like from the front gates, past all of the significant pitches, and down to the hotel, it feels special when you're driving it. But when you've factored it into your cycling challenge and you've been going for hundreds of miles at this point across the 2 days, it must have meant even more.
Yeah, so I think the journey from once we left Manchester, it's nowhere near as difficult as the Pennines and the Moors, but by that point you've got a lot of challenge that's already happened in your legs. So the hills, you wouldn't want them to be anywhere near the inclines that we'd experienced the day before. So they were a lot smaller. Some of them were massive inclines, and there were times then when all of us really had to kind of get off the bike and get it up there because they were very, very steep. But there was only one or two of those. So most of it was what I would call like rolling hills. You going up a bit, then down and up and down. It's very much like that. So it was a lot more comfortable to do it. But having said that, we stopped off in Uttoxeter. So you'd have seen this when you were tracking us. And we needed to stop. And it wasn't that far. As the crow flies, it wouldn't have been that far to St George's Park. But it was far enough for us to know that, particularly myself, it's probably all down to me, this. I'm sitting there thinking I need a bit more energy going into me for that last little bit. The knee was, again, becoming quite sore at that point. But once we'd done that, again, you feel like that's the last little stage. We knew we were nowhere near going to be in for the torrid time that we'd experienced the night before. So we were looking at a scheduled arrival time of before 8 o'clock, which felt so much more comfortable. Obviously, no loss of light or anything like that. And the Slater and Gordon guys, we'd lost one of them then. That was to be known. That was always going to be the case. But it was Nick, Richard, Mike, and I that went through to St George's Park. And because I've been there several times, Ryan, like yourself, you start as you get closer, you know how close you are. So you recognize certain points. That, again, it gives you a lift, right? Because you think, okay, I remember being in the car. And although you're in a car, the reality is you know you're not that far away. And look, sun helps everything. We were incredibly fortunate with the weather right the way through the challenge. We're so fortunate. I can't stress that enough, because had it been raining, it would have changed the dynamic massively. And we were also fortunate, particularly on the first 2 days with the headwind as well. We did not have much of an issue around that. So the closer I got to St George's Park, then just seeing it and knowing how close you were, I think that's the only time I was the lead cyclist. So that's how much energy that gave me, to know that at the end of that, it was probably about 22, quarter to 8, something like that. We could sit and go and have a bath and get and get ourselves sorted out, but then go down and have a nice meal that evening. So the whole thing felt different. And I have to say, I can't even remember. We took some photos just at the entrance to George's Park where the barrier is. And that's where we took some of the photos. That last little bit, which has got to be over a mile, I can't even remember that. It almost felt like we were floating into the Hilton Hotel, because at that point you're not thinking about anything other than kind of cracked it. And again, barring an absolute disaster at the end of that evening going into the next day, the back of the challenge had been broken at that point. So you probably saw me with a massive smile on my face and embracing the Slater and Gordon guys and Nick, because the reality is we kind of knew that was the hard yards that had been done up until that point. So it was a pleasure. I mean, St George's Park is always one of those places that I just find inspiring anyway. It's just the land. Again, it's the sun that helps, but the land, what it stands for, what you know you're about to see and what you're about to ride past, just amazing, absolutely amazing. So yeah, I've never been so pleased to get off the bike just outside the England badge at Hilton Hotel, and then call that a day. That was a lovely moment. That
it was a sight to see you peek over the horizon at St George's Park. And we, as you said, the weather was just incredible. You obviously rested, recovered. We had a really nice meal on the Saturday evening, and then came Sunday, the final leg. Just you and Nick setting off from St George's Park and heading straight for the Derby Arena, completing the Good Road to Derby, a journey that began at the home of the John Good Group and finished at one of the most exciting events in the Powerchair Football calendar, the quarter-final and semi-final showcase, which is fast becoming one of the most anticipated days of the season. We hosted the same stage of the competition last year, and the response was so strong from players, from fans, from partners, that we knew we had to return for the 24-25 season. What was it like arriving at Derby Arena, not just finishing the ride, but doing so surrounded by the Powerchair football community, the same community that will eventually be the beneficiaries of the Benevolent Fund?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those moments, isn't it? I sent you a message saying I'm not crying. So you kind of, the video had been cut and put together, and when I got to see that, I mean, it's still a moment. I must have watched that, and it sounds weird talking about this, but I've watched that so many times, and it's not to see myself. It's because I want to take all that moment in. Nick and I will never forget that moment cycling in, and you know me, Ryan. I turned around to you and said that this day is about the players. Let's play football. I'm not looking for any kind of fanfare, but I'm going to thank you for not only putting that together, but also everything you did with the organisation, and being a support to Roz as well, but just being awesome in terms of your upkeep on the social media. But you perhaps don't even realise how important it was to see your face at times, and then have that embrace between those various different checkpoints. So it's a personal thank you from me to you, and I know Nick feels exactly the same. You were selfless with your time and able to really give your support, and that means an awful lot. So I told you not to do anything like that, but I'm glad you ignored me, and that's absolutely fine to do something that's probably one of the most special moments that will live with me and Nick for forever. And I've talked about Nick in terms of being quite a private guy. I mean, a lot of people perhaps wouldn't call me introverted as a character. I quite am, so I don't actually need that kind of limelight. But it's one of those moments that when I cycled in there and the applause started, and I've got the camera crew that's kind of in it, the guys there and everyone else as well, with the camera in your face. it's all a bit overwhelming, but what a moment just to stop, take that applause, see the guys from John Good Group as well with the banner again, and then have chats with the community that I love. That was just one of those most wholesome moments you could possibly ever expect to experience. That's the abiding memory I will have. Nick and I will joke about the Pennines and the Moors, but the memory we will have is the moment where we went back into Derby Arena and we got that reaction and that response, and then people took the time to speak to us and wished us well and gave us hugs despite how we might have even smelt at that point. We'd had a shower that morning, by the way, just for the record. But it just means everything, doesn't it? And I've had so many messages that have been sent to me since from the community, just saying lovely things. And sometimes it kind of borders on all a bit too much, really. But it's why we're doing what we're doing, right? That's the sole reason for doing it. It is about, I've fallen in love with the sport, as everybody would hopefully be able to see on a daily basis. And when you see it, you just want to find a way that feeling and what it gives people is never taken away. And circling right the way back to the Benevolent Fund, that's the idea behind it. We experienced COVID a few years ago, and that was before my time, but there were probably some very tough decisions that had to be made. And the impact of people not being able to play the sport they loved, that would have hit lots of people from lots of in life in general, but with lots of sports. But I know our community would have really felt that. And actually something, however that would help, something that comes in and is able to create that sustainability of the sport and, do things and help people at the time they need it most, that's very much in my mind around it. And all that's done really is solidify the idea behind the concept behind the Benevolent Fund in the first place, in terms of going towards the community when they need it most. So no, it's an absolute pleasure to have done it. I'm very pleased we've done it. I feel like we tested ourselves enough as well. Nick has gone away with another objective now, which is #200. God knows what he's going to come back with on that. But it's all part of, as I talked about at the start, it's about a number of people doing this kind of thing. And if I can play my part in that and help raise the profile of it and bring in some pennies, then I'll continue to do so as well. So no, what an incredible moment going into Derby Arena. And that's on you, because I told you not to do it. So thank you.
It was a real amazing welcome for yourself and Nick. So from there, we went into the series of unforgettable quarterfinal, semi-final fixtures played out in front of what we believe to be a record-breaking crowd for a Powerchair football event here in England. 4 quarterfinals leading into 2 semi-finals, with 2 teams then booking their place in the final on Sunday, June 29th. It was an incredible day of football, extra time, penalties, drama, cup upsets, everything you want from a showcase like this. Quickly, how did you find the day itself, the atmosphere, the fixtures, and just seeing how many people have come together to watch and support Powerchair football?
Yeah, I mean, we again, back to yourself and the team, Ryan, we were putting an awful lot of work into the ambition to make this the best supported live Powerchair football event in England, and we achieved that, right? So Adam Walsh, CEO of John Good Group, and I were going around and doing the counting. And it's quite a difficult thing to do, right? Because the tickets were free. You just had to register, as everyone would know. And then we're kind of watching people watching the games, and I'm going around with my clicker, and Adam's doing the same thing. So we know there's over 300 people that were watching there. And you think about hosting at St George's Park for other events that we've done previously, you're probably talking about circa 200, just over. So, it's absolutely fantastic that we've achieved history in terms of the crowd. I think from the crowd perspective, that's our community, isn't it? The strapline was bring the noise. They definitely did that 100%. I love the spectacle of what they put on with that. I think the seating side of it, to have seating that was facing both courts as well, was a great idea from Alex Dowding to put that in place. So we had a fan base covering every single game that we played, which is fantastic. And then we moved to the one court on the semi-finals. There were lots of new people there that had never experienced Powerchair football before. Some of those from partners and sponsors we already have, but some new people as well. And again, there's been a lot of notes and comms that have come towards me from those individuals saying how impressed they were. feels like when we put on these events, we will always focus as a team on what we can do better and how we can improve it and build it bigger for the next year. And it's important that we do that. But we must also sometimes take stock of where we are and also recognise what we're able to put on. And we know, we're not blessed with a huge team. This is a small amount of individuals that are prepared to do whatever is needed for the benefit of the community to put these kind of showcases on. And I'm very proud of my team for the role that they played in that. We'll always want to focus on how do we beat it next year, and we will beat that next year 100%. That's always where our ambition will be, particularly with partners that carry an expectation, and rightly so, in John Good Group as well. So from my perspective, what an amazing day. I have to say I've got a bit of brain fuzz around most of the day because I was very jaded. I'd got some shower gel in my eye, and when I walked out, there was a lot of people coming up to me saying, "You're okay." I think they were looking at my eyes thinking they're very bloodshot. Are you about to burst a blood vessel? I can absolutely categorically say that was shower gel in my eye, but I was a little bit brain fuzzed. But the games themselves, amazing. I mean, it ends up with West Bromwich Albion and Aspire in the final. I think there's a lovely thing just for me to say out loud here. I spoke to John Kelly, and John Kelly said, look, we're in the final again with West Bromwich Albion, but that should not be mistaken for the fact that we are being pushed now to a level that we've never been pushed to before. You look at the quarter final between Newcastle and West Bromwich Albion. Wow, what a game of football! We could use other examples as well, but just the eyes on that game. Absolutely top audience there watching an absolutely incredible game of football that seemed that it would go on forever and ever and ever, having got to the penalty shootout and round again. But I think they're lovely words from John just to recognise, it may be those two teams that have got through to the final this year at St George's Park, and they deserve that, and it's well done to both of them. But I mean, it doesn't tell the whole story, does it? The 8 teams, the other 6 teams that are at Derby Arena, what a spectacle they put on. And nobody expected, I think it wasn't your Teesside, sorry, I'm picking at a scab there, but that losing that to Villa, that was extraordinary. Nobody anticipated that at all. And I think Alex on the podcast, didn't he predict Newcastle? So but though the teams are pushing all the time and getting better and better, and we're seeing that in our National League, aren't we, in our Premiership and indeed the Championship as well. So we know that's very apparent. But to hear John Kelly say that, I thought it was a lovely touch, really nice touch.
I don't think it's a coincidence that this increase in quality and competition coincides the amazing sponsors that we have. So everyone we've mentioned on this podcast, Optegra, Slater Gordon, UA92, MK Battery is the sponsors of this podcast, and obviously importantly the John Good Group. They're all playing their part in this level of competition, and that's why, particularly with John Good Group being their showcase, I want to shine a light on them because their support goes beyond just putting their name to the competition. I have to reiterate that time and time again whenever I'm given the opportunity. They've helped us try new things, reach new audiences, and they keep raising the bar for what the event can look like, can feel like, and it has been amazing working with a partner who genuinely cares about the sport and wants to see it grow. So for me, a huge thank you, and I want to mention them by name, the people that I've worked with behind the scenes: Adam Walsh, Rich Quelch, Nina Pybus, Phil Postel, Mel Deacon, Megan Hayward, and the wider team at the John Good Group for your support behind the scenes, which made one of the best showcases of Powerchair football ever delivered in this country. And roll on 2026, because as you said, Dean, we will make it bigger, we will make it better. But I think that serves as the perfect recap of the good road to Derby and a little preview of some of the results at Derby itself, which I'll get onto in part 2. Of course, a huge shout out and thank you to MK Battery for their continued support of this podcast, and to all the sponsors and supporters who've contributed to the Good Road to Derby or donated to the WFA Benevolent Fund. It is beyond appreciated. Dean, thank you for joining me, and more importantly, thank you for leading on such a meaningful challenge that's kick-started such an important fund that in turn will be invaluable to the Powerchair football community.
That is my total pleasure and always will be. Thank you, Ryan. And that's very cathartic as well to have done this part one of the podcast. So thank you for allowing me to do that and reliving those hills and the Pennines and the moors.
Right, welcome back to part 2 of this episode. In this section, we'll be talking about the football. I'm going to run through all of the key moments, standout performances, and the results from the quarter-finals and semi-finals of the 24-25 John Good Group WFA Cup, and also look ahead to that all-important showdown on Sunday, June 29th. And yes, it's just me for this bit. I know, not quite the format people are familiar with, but I'll try and recap things as concisely and clearly as possible without boring you all to death. So let's get into it. I have to say, broadly speaking, the day itself was a real success. It was a brilliant atmosphere, great support, and plenty going on around the court, as we alluded to briefly in part 1. But what stood out to me the most was just how tight and tactical the football became. I think every team there knew what was at stake, and it showed within the football. Some matches were cagey, others had big moments, but across all 6 games, you could really feel the weight of this occasion, and that's what we want. If we want this cup to be the absolute pinnacle of Powerchair football, it needs to have that weight and that expectation. It's not just about playing well, it's about making the right decisions under pressure, and that, I feel, is what shaped a lot of the matches. One of the most fascinating things about the John Good Group WFA Cup and cup football in general, I think, is the psychological battle and dilemma that it presents you. Teams wanting to go for it, play with attacking freedom, take control, against the instinct to be cautious, to protect what you have and not make mistakes that could cost you and your team. And that's the reality of the cup format. The stakes are so high and there is no second leg. If you go a goal down, you have to commit forward, sometimes in desperate pursuit of an equaliser with not much time left on the clock. Otherwise, you will exit the competition. I think teams are constantly trying to find that perfect balance. Take your chances, but don't get caught out. Be brave, but don't be reckless. And across all 6 games, 4 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, I think that was the defining theme. There was a noticeable pragmatism in the way teams approach their games, conservative setups, compact shapes, and a reluctance to commit too many players forward. So I think we saw teams playing within themselves ever so slightly, and that's in no way a criticism. It's the reality. The margins are that fine. Take Teesside as an example. A fantastic attacking side, full of pace, full of energy. If we talk about their players individually, you've got senior England internationals and players fast progressing through the England pathway, but they didn't necessarily take the risks they normally would. West Brom and Newcastle similarly were a little bit more reserved than we've come to expect, and it's understandable. This is cup football where one slip, one lapse, and the dream is potentially over, because I think we have to be clear, it's not just a shot at silverware or getting a medal placed around your neck. It's about the chance to feature at St George's Park, a place you have to remember only 4 different teams have reached in the past 7 years. So in the case of this season's competition, for teams such as Leeds Chariots, Villa Rockets Lions, Teesside and Nottinghamshire, that's not just a game, that's not just a series of fixtures, it's a dream. It's almost a validation of everything they've worked towards, as none of them have quite reached the pinnacle of league football either. So in terms of major accolades, the cup presents the best opportunity. But beyond that, it's a chance to perform on the biggest stage our sport currently offers. The WFA Cup final, part of the FA Disability Cup weekend, would be played in front of one of the largest crowds many of these players had ever experienced. It's broadcast live on TNT Sports to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And that's the platform. That's the chance to be the face of the sport. The moment a young disabled boy or girl flicks on the TV and sees Powerchair football for the first time and sees you and sees what's possible, that's just incredible. And I've said it before, we work tirelessly at the WFA to build Powerchair Football's platform, to grow the sport, to increase its visibility and give it the status we feel it deserves. But the truth is, as of today, we don't yet have the reach of a TNT Sports or a national TV audience. So when these opportunities come along, we have to grab them. Teams have to grab them, players and coaches have to grab them, not just for ourselves, but the future of our sport. Because that one match, that 1 hour or so of broadcast for the cup final at St George's Park, quite possibly does more to educate, inspire and bring awareness to this sport than the other 364 days combined. So that needs to be taken into consideration. So please bear all of that in mind when I'm recapping each of these quarterfinals and semi-finals. Let's start with quarterfinal 1, Leeds Charity versus Nottinghamshire. I had the pleasure of commentating it alongside David D. And from a tactical point of view, it probably played out exactly as I had anticipated. In the preview in episode 24, I talked about how Nottinghamshire's best hope was to keep it tight early, frustrate Leeds and crucially restrict the passing lanes between Dan Rigby and Jack Maxwell. But within, I think, 5 minutes, that threat, as it has done so all season, materialised to the detriment of the opposition. 3 attacking players combining. Lewis Harris, who has been brilliant all season, found Dan Rigby in space on the left, who proceeded to thread a perfectly weighted ball straight through the defence of Nottinghamshire. And then Jack Maxwell did what he's done all season, punished the opposition. And it's a connection that's become one of the most dangerous in the sport in England. Rigby now has 23 assists and 10 goals in all competitions. He is the ultimate creative force, and with 22 goals and 4 assists to his name, Jack Maxwell is proven to be the ultimate finisher, constantly capitalising on the end of that consistent world-class service. There is a real rhythm and understanding between the two of them that's so incredibly difficult to disrupt, and Nottinghamshire found out the hard way. But to their credit, Sam Lagley grabbed an equaliser around the 10-minute mark, and for a brief period the game felt like it may tip either way. But Leeds didn't panic, they stayed patient and they kept the ball moving, and their second goal came midway through the second half, I believe. Again, Dan Rigby the provider, his second assist of the game, this time putting the ball on a plate for Lewis Harris to take his chance really well. And I think a lot of this will be tied up in the outcome of the 24-25 Optegra Premiership. But I really do ask the question, could we see any of these players be in contention for maybe Player of the Season awards, Fantasy Team of the Season awards? Jack and Dan particularly are probably favourites for the Goal Scorer and Playmaker awards respectively. But Lewis Harris, he's been voted the standout player of the Premiership for 2 consecutive weekends, so he will be in contention. I have no doubt about that. So it played out kind of as expected. Nottinghamshire were organised, they were committed, but in the end I feel that the quality of Leeds, particularly in those final third combinations, was just too much for them to handle. I said about the pragmatism earlier in part 2, and that was evident in Leeds as well. Jack Britton, the most defensive of the 4 players for the majority of the game, rarely left the confines of his box, and once he was substituted and on came Harrison Taylor, it was very much the same. But Nottinghamshire had to chase the game, so Leeds had no reason to really commit players forward. And then I think 39 minutes in to seal their progression to the semi-final. Dan Rigby, straight from a corner, fired it in first time. David D and I were on commentary, and I think we was unsure whether or not it took a touch off the opposition or a teammate. And watching it back, I'm almost certain it didn't. A goal you very rarely see at any level of the game. Very instinctive, precise, and absolutely brilliant. So a strong performance from Leeds, both in terms of how they imposed themselves technically, but how they managed the moments when things could have swung in Nottinghamshire's favour. We'll talk about more about how the momentum they gathered from this game translated into their semi-final fixture, but overall a brilliant performance. Progressing now on to the second quarter-final, Aspire versus Villa Rockets Lions. Probably as expected, a very tough challenge for the single championship side remaining in the 24-25 Cup. It was the David versus Goliath. Aspire came into this tie with incredible cup pedigree. They've won the WFA Cup 7 times, 5 times runners-up. They're the reigning EPFA Champions Cup winners, and they've got some of the most experienced, decorated players the sport has ever seen. The final score was 3-0, but that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Villa Rockets Lions put in a really disciplined performance, particularly in that first half, where they stayed compact, worked hard, and kept Aspire to just the one goal. That opening goal coming from John Bolden, who is the leading goal scorer in the history of the sport in England, with well over 400 goals to his name, 56 of which have come in the WFA Cup alone. And then the second half saw Dan McClellan grab a brace, really composed finishes. He's such a brilliant player, intelligent, consistent, and stepping up since Brad Bates departed the club to rejoin West Bromwich Albion. But it's important, I think, to credit Villa Rockets Lions for the role they performed and their progression to this stage alone. In this game, Mason Hindley, I think, worked really well, tirelessly in the middle, and there were spells where they really made Aspire work to create anything meaningful. I flagged Nikki Baker before the game, a former Aspire player, twice a cup winner with them, and it was a really nice moment to see her back in that environment, giving everything for her current side, and she no doubt imparted some of that influence and experience on their performance. Naglis Montvillas has been such a bright spark for Villa this season, regularly contributing with goals and assists. We've said it before, I'll say it again. Since he joined Villa Rockets Lions, he has been involved in 85% of their goals, whether that's goal scoring or goal creation. But you have to commend Aspire's defensive organisation. They didn't give him the space to influence the game as in the way he so often does. So in the end, Aspire's experience, control allowed them to kind of breeze past Villa. They managed the game from start to finish and kept things tidy without ever needing to really overextend themselves. And I think that is something you have to bear in mind as we go forward and we reference the other quarterfinals and the eventual semi-finals and how that played a really big part in the outcome of the day. But Villa can and will take pride from that. Resilient, they stayed in it for long periods and shown they can compete on this stage. They are currently fighting for a playoff position in the championship, with us set to have game week 5 of the Optegra Championship this weekend. So we'll see how they fare. We'll come on to Aspire's semi-final later in the episode, but the quarter-final, I think, was just another reminder of why they've remained at the top for so long. Ruthless when needed, structured throughout, and once again led by the players who know exactly how to win these kinds of games. Next quarter-final, West Bromwich Albion, the reigning champions, versus Newcastle United Foundation. A matchup loaded with storylines, with quality, and two sides who have looked sharp all season long. In the preview of this fixture in episode 24, Alex Dowdin and I broke down this game, casting our thoughts and kind of predictions for the likely outcomes of the day. And he said that he feels Newcastle would be the potential winners of this competition. And I referenced how with Newcastle now being almost the outside runners for the Optegra Premiership, having lost some ground in game week 4, this is their real opportunity to lift silverware come season's end. From the start, I think you felt that sense of occasion and that reluctance maybe for the teams to commit forward, as I spoke about at the start. It was tight, it was compact. Chris Gordon and Jamie Harrison, as the respective managers of West Bromwich Albion and Newcastle, I think were reluctant to rotate or switch things up early. You could tell that there was a huge amount of respect for one another and maybe even a little bit of fear on both sides. Both Barris Innell and Lee Armstrong, as the two goalkeepers, rooted to their goalkeeper areas for the majority of the game. And the tempo of both never really opened up. We've come accustomed to West Brom playing this expansive 4-out way. We've seen Newcastle dabble in it since the acquisition of Cole Simpson. But that's not necessarily how it played out. For West Brom, it felt like there was a slight disconnect between Barris Chris and the forward line of Dylan Kelsall and Brad Bates, which, to be fair, is just a front attacking lineup stacked with goals and creativity. And Dylan's been firing on all cylinders this season, as has Brad, since he rejoined them. But early on, it just wasn't really clicking. For that, I have to give credit to Newcastle United Foundation. Despite that, West Brom, they did get the opener after 16 minutes. It came from the spot. The referee had adjudged Ethan Fisher to have made contact in the box with a West Bromwich Albion attacker, and it was a slightly contentious one. I know Jamie Harrison wasn't best pleased on the touchline, insisting that the decision should have gone in his and Newcastle's favour. But despite that, Chris Gordon used his experience to slot it home and put them 1-0 up in the quarter-final. It was after that Newcastle started to play. They grew in confidence, started stringing passes together. Cole Simpson had a few chances on the wing, but they just couldn't break through before half-time. The second half, I think, was more of the same. Tense, tight, no real risks being taken. And then I think around the half-hour mark, we saw the first significant change or substitute. Cole Simpson, who'd been zipping up and down the wing all game, came off, and on came Sam Smith, who I believe is the third highest scorer in the WFA Cup, on 28 goals, just one behind Ed Common in second. And the impact was almost immediate. Started to connect and establish chemistry with Ollie Crawshaw, who was just everywhere all game. For me, he was the player of the match. He picked up the ball kind of in his own half, on the halfway line, managed to surge himself and his team forward, exchange a quick 1-2 with Sam Smith before putting the ball over the line. The build-up, the vision, the strike, it was absolutely quality. Without question, my goal of the day, if not the competition as a whole. So that was 1-1. From there, both sides really dug in. West Brom brought Lucas Christa on in place of Barris Innell, and to credit him, he was solid. And then, before we knew it, extra time came and went without any real major chances before the teams were preparing for penalties. I think it was only the 18th penalty shootout in the WFA Cup history, and West Brom have been there, have done it. Of their 6 penalty shootouts prior to this one, they've won 3, but they've also lost 3, including the infamous 19-18 loss to Northern Thunder back in 2012. Newcastle, however, have never been involved, but you wouldn't have known it considering how composed and calm their players they were. Every player kind of tucked their respective penalty away with calmness, with precision. The nerves just didn't really show. We had a couple of retakes due to keeper movement. Under the WFA rules, keepers can sit side on, but they can't move before the ball struck. So Chris Gordon and Ethan Fisher were pulled up for that at different points. Eventually, it went to a full additional round of knockout penalties, and heartbreakingly for Newcastle, it was Ollie Crawshaw, who'd been sensational throughout the fixture, whose penalty was saved by Chris Gordon. And then following that, Brad Bates stepped up to calmly slot it home and send West Brom through and keep their unbeaten record well intact. It was top level Powerchair football. It had tension, it had drama, it had quality, tactical discipline. Newcastle left absolutely everything out there and pushed one of the most experienced sides in the country all the way. But once again, West Brom showed that champion mentality, as we've seen in the league, we're seeing in the cup, and they booked their spot in the semi-final draw. Quarter final 4 was contested between Villa Rocket and Teesside, and this was just another reminder of just how unpredictable and compelling cup football can be. It plays right into something I mentioned earlier about the idea that knockout football isn't always about the free scoring dominant teams who go through. It's often the sides that can stay compact and manage key moments and show pragmatism when it counts, and that's exactly what Villa Rockets did here. Teesside, I have no question in everyone's minds, were favourites. Their form coming into this was absolutely outstanding. The best goal difference in the Premiership, averaging 3.29 goals per game. 10 clean sheets out of their 17 league games as well, and they are yet to see defeat since the end of October 2024. So they were flying, and I expected them fully to carry that momentum into this fixture. I thought their attacking quality would be too much for Villa, but they were brilliant, composed, disciplined, smart, and it's something we've started to see more and more from them this season. The longer they play together, the better the chemistry looks, and there's now a real shared understanding of the roles and the responsibilities and how they manage different phases of the game. Dave Lewis and Bobby Allen, since they joined the squad from West Brom and Nomad Knights respectively, have made a huge difference. Dave brings that calm, experienced presence, while Bobby gives them so much energy and threat going forward. And the side as a whole just feels more balanced. There's strength, there's stability in key areas. And as I've said countless times on the podcast this year, Villa, as well as many others, I think are a team to watch next season. Once they've got a full campaign under their belt, I think they're going to cause a lot of problems in both the league and the cup. But back to this game, it finished 0-0 after extra time, and that I don't think tells the full story. There was a lot going on tactically. Villa were happy to concede territory, as they often do, but always looked comfortable and well drilled. Hamza Madir's return gave them a solid foundation at the back, something they've perhaps been missing in recent weeks, with him missing game week 3 and game week 4 of the Premiership. Teesside had more of the ball, but just couldn't break through. I really loved seeing Dave Lewis back in a more front foot attacking role, one similar to his time at West Bromwich Albion Throstles. And as a starting 4, Hamza, Bubba, Dave and Bobby, that will challenge a lot of the top teams out there. So we had the 40-minute fixture, we had the 2 5-minute intervals of extra time, and it was still yet to be decided. So we had our second penalty shootout of the day. Neither of these sides have experienced one before, but again, you just wouldn't have known it. Villa went first, Dave Lewis stepping up, dispatching his effort calmly, showing all of his experience under pressure. Then it was on the responsibility of Tyler Reeve to step up, but his effort was unfortunately saved by Hamza Madir. There was a little bit of debate as to whether Hamza moved before the ball was struck. So Teesside slightly frustrated, but the save did stand. And later in the shootout, Amir Adley had the chance to seal it at 3-2, but again, his effort was saved well by Baxter, taking us to sudden death. From there, it was a brilliant run of penalties, full of composure, of nerve, until eventually Tyler Reeve returned to the spot for the third time of the shootout. But once again, as was the case with his first, Hamza Madir did brilliantly to deny him and send Villa through. Without question, one of Villa's most significant wins in recent years. The last time Villa reached the cup final or St George's Park was 2016-2017, I believe, before it was branded as this FA Disability Cup weekend, before it was televised on TNT Sports, before the event came what it is today. And I have no doubt that experience would have been in the back of their minds and driving them on. So to knock out one of the best sides in the country, a team in hot pursuit of the Premiership title, it has to be given credit. So Villa stayed composed, they stayed patient and delivered when it mattered. And with that result, we had our final four confirmed. Each of the four ties gave us something a little bit different. Leeds Chariots showing their attacking class and control against Nottinghamshire. Aspire putting in a measured professional performance against a spirited Villa Rockets Lions. West Bromwich Albion coming through a real test against Newcastle United Foundation after one of the best shootouts we've seen in quite some time. And then Villa Rockets delivering the shock of the round, arguably, with a performance full of discipline and belief to knock out Teesside. Four teams for very different journeys, but they were all in the hat for the semi-final draw. Now, the draw itself took place around 45 minutes after the final whistle of that second round of quarterfinals. Just enough time, I think, for players and staff, particularly those involved in the later fixtures like West Brom, Newcastle and Villa Teesside, to just really take a breath, grab some refreshments and mentally reset before things started to ramp up again. The draw was conducted by the Chief Executive Officer of the John Good Group, Adam Walsh, the Chief Marketing Officer of the John Good Group, Rich Quelch, and WFA Chairperson Dean Williams, and they delivered two fascinating semi-final matchups. First name out the hat was Leeds Chariots, shortly followed by Aspire, confirming semi-final one. A really intriguing clash of styles, two teams full of quality, both with an eye on that final spot at St George's Park. And then came the second tie, Villa Rockets drawn against their Midlands rivals West Bromwich Albion. Another brilliant contest lined up with Villa chasing another upset and West Brom looking to keep their unbeaten season alive. So into semi-final one, Leeds Chariots versus Aspire, and this one really had all of the ingredients of a classic. A team chasing their first ever WFA Cup final appearance against the most decorated side in the competition's history. It was high quality, it was full of tactical battles and played with a real intensity from the first whistle. It was Aspire who made the faster start and were rewarded just 5 minutes in, John Dixon, who was outstanding throughout, it must be said, latched onto a smart pass on the counter-attack and showed great composure to just guide it past Jack Britton in goal. It looked as if John Dixon had run out of options when he was advancing down that right-hand wing of Aspire, but the timing of the finish was perfect, and it was a moment that really showcased his experience and sharpness. And worth noting that he's acclimatising to life at a new club, having moved from West Bromwich Albion and Throssels in the summer. But as we've seen so all season, Leeds are nothing if not resilient. 10 minutes later, they were level. A quickly taken set piece from Dan Rigby, catching Aspire off guard, finding Jack Maxwell, who made no mistake, tucking the ball away with real confidence to make it 1-1. It's something they've done so often this season. It was the case in their quarter-final against Nottinghamshire. And that equaliser, the combination between the two, almost sparked a spell of pressure for Leeds. Rigby in particular, pulling the strings in the centre. And there was another brilliant moment in the half where he fired a sensational pass across the box late that Maxwell was inches away from converting, and that could have easily been the goal that saw Leeds take a 2-1 advantage into the break. But 1-1 half-time whistle, very little to separate the sides, exactly what you want to see in a semi-final. But in the second half, Aspire's game management and probably their experience came to the fore. They showed exactly why they are one of the most decorated, successful sides in the competition. I think they slowed the game down. They brought the tempo down, absorbed pressure and waited for their opportunities. Again, we go back to that pragmatism. And I think it was 30-minute mark, their chance came. Once again, John Dixon timing his run perfectly and finishing off a slick attacking move to put them back in front. And from that point on, they controlled the tempo. Leeds pushed really hard in the closing stages, but Aspire's defensive shape held firm. Tom Kelly doing a brilliant job, and John Balding marshalling things from the centre. There was a late Leeds opportunity. Another brilliant driven pass from Rigby flashed across the face of goal, but sadly for them, no one was able to connect. And then the final whistle blew, and Aspire booked their place in a record 13th WFA Cup final, still chasing what would be an 8th title. And for Leeds, it was heartbreak. They pushed the European champions all the way and showed once again why they're one of the most improved, exciting sides in the country. But on the day, Aspire's composure and quality in the key moments saw them progress through. The second semi-final saw reigning champions West Bromwich Albion take on a Villa Rocket side riding high after their quarter-final upset. And for 20 minutes, this was shaping up to be a real test of patience and discipline. Villa were resolute, organised and compact, and everything that they needed to be to stay in the game. They frustrated West Brom for the entire first half, absorbing relentless pressure and keeping the goal goalless at the break. Their structure, I think, was spot on. Hamza Madir and Amir Ali once again defending superbly, and Dave Lewis, I think, covered every inch of the court. So credit to them. They did what they had to in that first half. Just prior to the halftime break, Chris Gordon opted to bring Matt Gilbert into the play, and that seems to be a moment that changed everything. Seconds into the second half, Gilbert made an instant impact. A neat passing exchange on the edge of the box gave him space, and he took full advantage, firing home the opener with some real authority. And from there, I think West Brom started to turn the screw. Villa were forced to come out, leaving gaps and vulnerabilities in behind. And anyone that is a regular watcher of Powerchair football will know how much West Brom can punish you on quick, decisive counterattacks, and that proved to be exactly the case just 5 minutes after, when Matt Gilbert struck again, this time with a sublime 180 spin kick, letting the ball run across his chair before sweeping it into the far corner. A real top-tier goal from one of the most consistent players in the game. I said it on commentary, I'll say it now. He is one of the most underrated players in England. He doesn't always get the headlines, but you would genuinely struggle to find a player more dependable. And that is not just a brace to decide the match. It's a brace that's propelled his side to another final. And he has 23 WFA Cup goals to his name now, moving him to 4th in the all-time scorer charts in the competition's history. So it really was fully deserved. Villa, to their credit, never stopped trying. But without the likes of Liam Lynch or Summer Rice, 2 players that have been so dependable for them in the Premiership, they had no subs available. So they didn't have the firepower to break through. But they've showed incredible progress this season, and as I've said before, give them this campaign and see how and what they do next season, because I have no doubt it will be exciting. And with that, the stage is set. Aspire versus West Bromwich Albion, 2 giants of the game, 2 of the most decorated sides in English Powerchair football history, set to meet once again under the bright lights of St George's Park for the 24-25 John Good Group WFA Cup final as part of the FA Disability Cup weekend, televised on TNT Sports. So a huge congratulations and a good luck to both. But before they even get there, it's worth noting that both have one more monumental challenge, National League aside, the FIFA Powerchair Football Club World Cup in Paris. The first time this competition has ever taken place, and to have not one but 2 English teams representing our country on that global stage, I hope tells you everything you need to know about the strength and stature of the domestic game here. And the outcome of that tournament could absolutely shape the WFA Cup final, with the competition ending just 2 days before the St George's Park showdown. So travel fatigue, momentum, form, even potential injuries, they're all factors that could come into play. Aspire, of course, are the EPFA Champions Cup holders. They know what it takes to win in Europe. West Brom, meanwhile, are hungry to make their mark globally. And whatever happens in Paris, they'll both land back in England on the Saturday, probably a day prior to the final, and it adds a whole another layer to this incredibly intriguing narrative. So that's it. 4 thrilling quarterfinals, 2 intense semi-finals, and now just 1 game remains. A huge thank you to everyone that's listened, watched, attended, and supported the journey so far. We will be back, no doubt, very soon for another episode of the 2-on-1 Powerchair Football Podcast, powered by MK Battery.